Yo, what's up, everybody? Super excited to be here. I want to welcome everybody to the Web3 Gaming Show. We're here to explore the world of Web3 gaming and hear from the people who are creating this very exciting future. We'll be exploring the stories of game developers, community builders, content creators, and industry experts who are pioneering the next generation of gaming. Join us as we dive into the ever-growing Web3 gaming space and learn more about the amazing opportunities that lie ahead. First of all, I want to introduce for our first episode of the Web3 Gaming Show, which I'm very excited about, to talk to Chris. I met Chris about a year ago, actually hopping around Twitter Spaces. And since then, we've been kind of part of the same communities, which has been amazing to kind of keep up with him and learn more about what he's doing in the space to keep on pushing us forward. How are you doing today, Chris?
I'm doing well. Glad to be here.
Dope. Well, Chris, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and maybe your journey within this really exciting and kind of crazy world of Web3 gaming?
Yeah, absolutely. It has been a wild ride for sure. So my background is I'm a developer, CIO, and business owner. And I have been in blockchain as well for years. I did some blockchain application development, but mainly my business was in the Web2 space. So I did a lot of consulting for companies, kind of help them with their digital problems. But my passion has always been for like blockchain and gaming, and so this has been really like a merging of that. And so I've been kind of like transitioning my business into the Web3 space, and that's where I founded Uldor and started this Web3 gaming company.
Cool. Did you have any kind of gaming experience before then? I mean, I'm sure that also made, your journey today much different than possibly someone else's.
Yeah, absolutely. So, obviously, I've been a passionate gamer for years. I did work on some games early in my career, and so worked on some early MMOs. I worked on way back. Some of you won't even be familiar with like text-based MUDs, the multi-user dungeons, which was kind of like the predecessor to MMOs that we play today. But yeah, so worked on some of those. Worked for some of those gaming companies. Did some consulting for some indie game developers, and I've had a network of developers. I've been in that space for a while, but a lot of my like professional work just kind of took me in a different direction. But that's always been my passion.
Right. Well, how would you say was like what was the story of the coming together of Max Level Studios? And can you speak a little bit more about, what you're doing there and I guess also how you're building Uldor?
Yeah, absolutely. So I say gaming was my passion. Uldor specifically has been a passion project of mine. And I sometimes tell the story, but I actually bought the domain uldor.com back in 2011. So more than 10 years ago. And I really wanted to build an MMO that did things differently. I saw that the genre was kind of in decline, and we've seen that in the numbers. If you like look, everybody talks about MMOs. When we talk about Web3, we talk about MMOs is like the obvious choice for a Web3 game. But
Right.
if you look at the genre, the player numbers have come down significantly in MMOs. The genre is in decline. It's also more competitive. There are more people building MMOs, and they're not as sticky as they used to be. And there's a number of reasons for that. Some of it is the competition, but it's also just some of the things, some of the directions that a lot of us saw. You see the rise in the nostalgia MMOs like RuneScape, classic WoW. These come back and it kind of surprises the developers at the number of players who want to play things the way they were, 15 years ago.
Right.
And some of that is the nostalgia, but some of it's also just like the direction and how some of the MMOs have kind of chased the casual gamers and that kind of trend. And I don't think that the strategy was very good there. But yeah, so this was something I've wanted to do for a while. And when Web3 came along, I was like a lot of people, kind of slept on NFTs a bit. I didn't buy a Bored Ape, and I didn't have a CryptoPunk, but I was kind of watching the space. I was in the like altcoin movement. I was developing over there, and when a friend of mine founded a Web3 company, he founded a NFT startup and started doing digital art. He asked me to help him with some digital marketing and community building. And so I got into the space. And that's where I really started to get into NFTs. Like I got it. And I started collecting them. I started minting PFPs and got into all those communities. And then it just clicked for me. The things that were happening in the NFT space were going to revolutionize gaming. I mean, it was just so obvious. I wasn't following Axie. I really, wasn't aware of like the play to earn movement.
Right.
But when I saw what was going on in like PFPs, community building, and the power of the NFT, with the on-chain transparency,
Mm.
provable scarcity, the transaction history. I think that I put that in the context of like an MMO marketplace and thinking, wow, this would be revolutionary. It would put so much power into the hands of the players. And so
Mm.
that's when I kind of like dove in. And so I founded my gaming studio, started reaching out to every developer I knew, and started putting together a team. And it was an interesting ride because, this was a year ago when we started. It was actually August of 2021. So over a year ago, we started building up the NFT community, and so it's kind of like you have to have the Web3 experience. You've got to be able to make NFTs and know how Solidity contracts work and all that. But then you also are building a game that is going to appeal to gamers, and so you have to have game developers, game designers, and that was an interesting team to put together. But it's been a great journey.
Right. I think one of the things you hear about today is how much do you focus on Web3 and how much do you focus on the game? How do you think about that question?
So I think that you really have to zoom out when you think about it, because when you're really deep in the space, I see it as kind of like a pendulum swinging. We started with like play to earn. People saw what happened with Axie, and it was revolutionary. And I think they did a lot of things well, but
Mm.
it wasn't sustainable, and they didn't see a lot of the potential problems,
Mm.
and because of that, the pendulum kind of shifted the other way, and now we see a lot of talk about you shouldn't be able to earn anything in games.
Mm.
The Web3 component should be totally hidden. Players don't want to buy game assets. I mean, there's a lot of things that I think are probably overstatements. It's like overcorrecting. Um,
Right.
it's important not to forget the value that blockchain can bring to gaming. But I do think that it's also important for game developers to, when you build a game economy, to think about that as a player-driven economy. You're building the rails, but it ultimately you want to hand that over to the market. Now, different game genres may be different. If you're making an FPS, you probably want to have your game economy focused around skins and cosmetics and things like that, because that's what works. But if you're
Right.
building like an MMO, you need to have a much broader economy, one that players have a lot more control, but give them that transparency of blockchain, and they're going to do so much more with it. So I think the obviously like play to earn was unsustainable, and it was a good thought experiment. It was something that taught us a lot of lessons and things that we should look out for, because you don't want to build an economy that kind of blows up in your face, but at the same time you also don't need to overcorrect and
Mm.
take away from what are good, things that are going to be good for gamers, and give players like more control, more transparency, because I'm a big believer that blockchain is going to be very disruptive for gaming, and it's going to give that value. Because like right now, if you think about a lot, like 99% of the value in gaming goes to the developers,
Right.
and that's fine, but it's become an extremely profitable business.
Mm.
When you buy an asset, almost 100% of the money you pay is that sunk cost. You're getting the entertainment value, but the other value, the monetary value, is all going to the developers.
Mm.
I think Web3 is going to turn that around, and I think that the value is going to go to the players, and the developers are going to draw value when there's long-term value for the game. So when the assets, like I believe in the marketplace fees and the royalties,
Mm.
as a great model for gaming, and not necessarily a lot of like primary NFT sales. But yeah, that's like a long-winded answer to that question.
No, 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 don't worry about it. I think you mentioned something which is like MMORPGs possibly are one of the most exciting genres that I've seen because of how complex their economies are, or they can get. Also, their gameplay. Can you tell us a little bit more about Uldor, get us excited for the game, and then also explain like the thought process behind the entire project?
Yeah, absolutely. So Yeah, Uldor is an open world MMORPG. We're developing it in UE5. We have a fantastic story, and we've put out some like lore articles that kind of dive into our main villain, the Dread King, and the faction breakup that's happening. So the world was ruled by an empire, and um, due to some kind of missteps and partly related to our main villain of the story, two factions have now broken off. And so we have these three rival factions. And basically, when we look at MMOs, we see it as like, it's kind of a meme in game development. You know, every developer wants to develop an MMO. It's the most ambitious, time-consuming, and expensive genre to build in. But what really changes the game today is one, Web3, which is going to be very disruptive. I think that it is a great time to build new IP in the space because, and when I say the space, I mean the gaming space, because you know, some of the legacy guys are not going to embrace Web3, and
Right.
that's a hot take of mine sometimes, because I think a lot of people are kind of waiting for EA and Blizzard to just sweep in and give us that AAA Web3 game. I
Yeah.
don't think that that's coming anytime soon, but that may be my perspective. But also UE5 and game engines in general have made developing high quality games easier than ever. And when I say easier, I mean it's less developers, less development time,
Mhm.
you know, cheaper cost. It is much more scalable. So, like an open world in particular, you know, if you're building like a single player, smaller kind of game, you may not notice a lot of improvements, but like a big open world, it's just amazing with you know, like lumen lighting, the
Mm.
nanite for textures, and how you can now you know, stream these textures at much cheaper cost to you and also to the clients, to where they're not having to, you know, have this you know, super impressive hardware to be able to run a large game like that.
Right.
But yeah, so we also took our development and kind of, we looked at how to build an MMO, and the options are, you can kind of like go heads down, build for, you know, 3 years, and then spend half your budget on marketing the game,
Mm.
or you can kind of shake that up and develop it in phases.
Mm.
You know, most MMOs have some kind of like a PvP arena. So that's usually like something that you have, like you get unlocked later on in the game. You play the MMO, you put hundreds of hours in, then you get the PvP arena. But you know, part of what I was saying before about how MMOs kind of took the wrong direction to appeal to casual gamers, one of the things you can do is have your PvP arena out first, or early, to where it's not gated by hundreds of hours of play. Because
Yes.
your average gamer, like especially your casual gamer, they're not going to sink all that time into your MMO. So if you
Right.
want them to come to your game and for the PvP, now you're kind of incentivized to weaken the leveling process to make it something where they jump in and they can quickly go from level 1 to level 50 or whatever to be able
Right.
to do PvP. And that kind of just lessens the experience for the real RPG players who want to
Right.
sink that time and experience into the game. So
Mm.
that's one thing we're doing, is we're developing the game in phases, with our first playable mode being a single player wave based experience, really just to kind of show off our the gameplay we've built so far, the fighting
Mm.
mechanics, movement, quality of the game, just kind of get a feel for it. But then
Right.
our next big mode is going to be our PvP. So it's a PvP arena where players can fight head to head. They can, you know, join in teams, fight in tournaments, and then we'll introduce faction battles to where players can go in and you know, this is our first like persistent world, but it's a much smaller scale. But it's the three factions fighting over territory. You can go
Mm.
capture territory, build up
Right.
defenses, and fight over enemy territory. And once you capture and build up defenses, you get certain benefits and unlock certain content, things like that. And then we introduce the open world and expand that out over time. So we
Right.
thought that this was a better way to build, especially, I mean, I think we see this a lot in the Web3 space. Like, people want transparency. They want to know what's happening. They want to just like think that you're building in secret, you know.
Right.
But I think it also makes more sense in game development because you can save a lot on marketing when you can build a community over time, and you can start bringing in gamers, you get a lot of metrics a lot earlier when you can deliver pieces. And another important component of this is you avoid that release, like the big failed release that some games have, where they push a version out there that they've been working on for years, and it's just broken somehow. Like they didn't think about the gameplay loop, breaking in a certain way, or they didn't test it on enough machines. Something goes terribly wrong.
Right.
And you kind of avoid that when you already have players playing your game, stress testing it, over a period of time. So yeah, that's why we've kind of built it in the way that we have.
You mentioned something that I think is very interesting and almost specific to Web3, which is building a community as you build the game. Can you give some more insight on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to just like build a community around the project, get people hyped about what you're doing, and you get great feedback. You also like you're learning your potential customer. You're learning what are they interested in. When you talk, when you give we give weekly Twitter Spaces, and so when you talk on a Twitter Space and somebody jumps up to comment on it, that is valuable feedback. I mean, that's something that marketers have to pay a lot of money to get that kind of feedback, and to be able to test things, to hear in Discord, and you hear back your own words, but through your customers. And I think that's very valuable for a game developer. It's very valuable for a Web3 builder, to be able to get that feedback back and hear how your messaging. Because a lot of times we craft a message and we put it out there, and then when it comes back, we think, did we say it that way? Is that what we meant to say? And because they hear it a different way. So it's important to get that kind of feedback. And but I think building a community is super valuable, because some of the most successful games didn't have a lot of marketing. They had something that connected and resonated with their community, and that community took it and told 10 other people and 100 other people, and it just spread. So I'm all for that, like organic marketing. I mean, obviously there's a huge role for marketing in gaming. And once you have those metrics and you have that budget, that makes a lot of sense. But I think community building, you're going to get those passionate gamers, people that want your project to succeed, and they're going to give you valuable feedback at every step. So it's just a great like sounding board. It's a great like early test. Like if you put out an alpha version of a game and you get 100 random people to play it, you don't know that you're getting, you don't know the opinions that you're getting. Like you're going to get feedback, but it's hard to equate that. You really have to learn a lot about those people. But if they're already in your community and you give them that alpha, you're going to get a whole different type of feedback. So there's value to both, but I think that having your own community and building that out is long-term value for any project.
Definitely. I think a lot of game devs ask themselves that question, right? Which is like, how do I build that community? What have you seen is the thing that works the most for Uldor?
Yeah, and that's something that's tricky. And in the Web3 space, it's easy to kind of get discouraged because you see projects seemingly doing everything, and it takes so long to grow, or they kind of fail at it. And then you see other projects where it just seems easy. It's like they just come out of nowhere. How did this go to 80,000 followers or whatever? And so it's important to kind of understand the space and all those mechanics. But I think it's also important to just be really consistent. Whatever your message is, like you want to pivot and you want to be kind of nimble because you're a startup. You're building something, and so if you get negative feedback, you want to listen to that. But it's also important to stick to your vision and be consistent about your messaging, your transparency. Talk to people. I think that's important. But I'll also say for us, and I'm really proud of the size of our community. I'm glad that we continue to grow. But I recognize the names of so many people in our community from people that I personally reached out to. One of the things I did when I started, when we first built or set up the Uldor Discord and Twitter, I started personally reaching out to people that I knew from other projects and saying, hey, I want to tell you about something I'm working on. And I shared my passion with them. And most of those people that I talked to personally are still around today. And there are champions in our community, and they're telling their friends about it. And so, just making connections, being transparent, showing people yourself, your vulnerabilities and all that. I think that's important for community building.
Definitely. I know, I totally agree. And I think now that you're kind of talking about the stages to growth, realizing, as you mentioned earlier, like how big game studios aren't really like diving into Web3. And we might see like the same thing that happened with free to play with like Supercell and all these other studios that came up because, larger gaming studios didn't really want to utilize the free to play model. Do you envision that very similarly to Web3 and possibly like what is a timeline for that almost?
Yeah. And that's such an interesting question because it's really hard to predict, but I'll say, I think that, I think Web3 is very disruptive for gaming. Like, I think that is something that is as disruptive as, like the internet was for retail. Amazon, when you look at like Sears, which was the biggest retailer in the world when Amazon came out, they could have easily built a website, started selling online, and dominated the space. They had the money, they had the resources, but they didn't do it. The same thing with like with streaming. When streaming came along, and even before that, like when Netflix was like a DVD rental service, they Blockbuster and others had the opportunity to buy them for pennies, but they didn't do it. And I have this discussion a lot, and people say, well, these AAA companies are going to come over because they see it as the future, but they know that they're going to make less money, that they're going to have to like share some of that with players. That's where I get real skeptical, because when you're an investor and you're buying shares in a company, a publicly traded company worth billions of dollars, and they've got a steady revenue, you don't want them to jeopardize that revenue to kind of chase something new. You want them to do the same thing they've done and find a way to just, make a small improvement on it. You want to see consistent returns. You don't want to see them jeopardize. I mean, look at Facebook. When Zuckerberg changed the name to Meta and started chasing metaverse, he's one of these young investors that he sees the power of disruption, and he's looking 10 years out, and what does Facebook, the profitability over time look like? What do we need to do to, do something bold to be relevant in the future? And so he chased metaverse, but investors are freaking out. It's like, it's been a year or however long, and, you sunk all this money into it. We don't see that 10-year vision that you do. I'm not saying that he's necessarily going to, succeed, because part of disruption is it's disruptive to the like legacy people, but it's also a big opportunity for startups to try new things and innovate. And when you do that, when there's 100 startups, 99 of them may fail, but the one that succeeds could succeed really big. So, we look at like the .com era in the 90s, and a lot of those companies failed. They just were too early. They didn't plan ahead. They, had whatever the reason, they had a lot of problems. But the ones that succeeded are the biggest companies in the world today. The internet companies like dominate. So I think that Web3 gaming is going to be similar to that for gaming. Now, 5 years, we may see like some Web3 companies that we're talking about today, maybe ones that aren't even out yet today, could be some of the bigger game companies in 5 years. But I still think that, Activision and EA and all those guys they're going to be around, and they're going to be very relevant. But 10 or 15 years, I think it depends. It really depends on how the landscape shifts. And I'll say, like, it's such a great time to build today. Starting new IP today is exciting because you can do it on a budget. You've got the best game engines in the world, while some of the big guys like EA and Activision, they are largely stuck in proprietary game engines. They're having to compete with Epic's Unreal Engine. They're having to compete with Unity, and Unity and Unreal are every developer's engine. They are constantly innovating, and they're handing it out to millions of developers who are now competing with the biggest game companies in the world. And the next biggest thing, so you have the game engines, you have the Web3, like whole changing the paradigm of monetization. But then you have AI,
Yeah.
which it could be game changing for a number of things. Both in the like workflow, it helps. Like today, you can go on GitHub and AI is helping developers write code faster and more efficiently.
Mm,
Chat GPT, it helps creators come up with ideas and take concepts into uh, bigger content
right.
in seconds. And then you've got like Midjourney and all these art tools that are they're starting to build game focused art tools that are building 2D game art, and there's a lot of people working on 3D game art, which if and when that, I mean, it's not a question of if, but whenever that becomes feasible, that's going to be game changing. And so we're basically democratizing so many tools that
Right.
were so expensive and time consuming before that only the biggest guys could use them. And so I think it's going to be an interesting landscape in 5 to 10 years when game development has become easier to make a quality game. Web3 gives the power, or a lot of the power, the transparency, the value to the players,
Right.
and the developers are now having to convince players why they should come spend their money and time in their game. Uh, that's going to be a really interesting thing, and I'm excited for it because I'm a gamer at heart, and I'm also excited because I want to build a company in that space. I want to be the company that says, we're building amazing player experiences, and you get most of that value, and you're making a lot of the decisions, and so I don't think that that's something that some of the big developers are really excited about personally.
I see. I see. It's very much so like player driven, right? It's not necessarily really anything else. I did want to ask, like, what is, I saw on your Twitter that you have a playable version for Uldor. Going back to Uldor real quick, playable version like coming out soon. And then also, I guess after that, we can talk about like Uldor's audience and like how do you plan on onboarding them specifically?
Yeah, so we do have a playable version coming soon. I think I mentioned earlier that we've built a single player wave based mode. We call it the Dread Arena. So the Dread King is our main villain in our story, and in this mode, you'll fight against the horde of enemies from the Dread King. And so we are going to be making a big announcement on that on Monday. So if you want to follow the Uldor Twitter, that's at Uldor Game, then you'll get that announcement on Monday, where we'll be talking about the release of that particular mode. But really excited about it. It's something that I've put a lot of hours into myself. We've had some early play testers, gotten great feedback on it. So yeah, I'm excited for more people to play it, give us feedback. Yeah, but we'll be making that announcement Monday.
Right, definitely. And then, so in terms of like Uldor's audience, kind of moving forward, when we start seeing this mass adoption, like who are they, and then how do you plan on onboarding them specifically? I think that's a big question that every game developer has that isn't we can't necessarily answer today. But what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, and onboarding is such an interesting question today because when you think about like NFTs and other Web3 terminology in the traditional gamer space, there's a
Right.
lot of negativity and a lot of backlash.
Mm,
I think a lot of that goes back to because you read some of the articles like PC Gamer and others where they talk about gamers reject NFTs and things like that, and a lot of the attitudes of gamers is NFTs was just another way for companies to extract money from us,
right.
and they didn't see it as a value add to them. They
Right.
saw it as it really goes back to the mistrust that average gamers have for some of
Mm,
the large game producers. They see them as greedy companies that are constantly trying to extract value, and some of that goes to like the free to play model, which I'm a big proponent of. I think free to play really lowered that barrier to entry, but it
right.
came with those downsides of monetization problems where game developers couldn't just rely on a subscription. They now have to sell things in game.
Yeah.
And if I sold you a sword or a gun, well, that's a one-time transaction. So
Right.
I have to get something from you in the future. I have to encourage you to buy something else. So now I have to make something else that you want more, and that means either making it better than the thing that you have,
Right.
making more of it. And there's just a lot of monetization problems with free to play. I think Web3 is going to fix a lot of that when done correctly. So I'm excited for that kind of narrative change. But also, I'm kind of watching what some of the bigger players are doing. We're about to see a Super Bowl ad about Web3 gaming. That's going to be very interesting, and to see how that goes. I know like Illuvium, they have a huge budget for marketing, and they also, really wanting to attract Web2 gamers. And I think that's the future. I don't know if these early game companies, even with their massive budgets, I don't know if they're going to be successful, but I do think that they're going to help with the narrative.
Right.
And once gamers play a good Web3 game, or they click and see that potential, I think it's going to be a lot like new gaming genres. When a game did battle royale really well, what happened? Now players are looking on Steam, and they're looking on other game launchers for battle royale games. When Souls-like came out, when Dark Souls came out, now everyone wants to play Souls-like game, and so they go look for those, like even a tiny Souls-like game. They want to go find it and play it. And so I think that we're going to see that with Web3. I think that once players understand it, and they try it and they see the value, they're gonna start looking for Web3 exclusively, and they're gonna start playing that genre. I think there's a lot of ways to do Web3 poorly, so it'll be interesting to see like how, what are the metrics that players look for in a game. Like what are the things that they want, and how to define those, and make sure that you're attracting those players. That'll be interesting, because I don't think just sticking the Web3 tag or NFT necessarily is going to be what attracts gamers, but I think there's going to be some aspects of it, that they're going to resonate with. And they're going to say, I want this in games that I play. So I think that it's going to be important to kind of like watch the space, make sure you're very transparent, but also just be very aware with what clicks with players that you're wanting to attract.
Right. I think you said something that really hits to me, which is there's so much untrust in player to game developer kind of relationships, because of like, in the past, we didn't have the tools to facilitate meaningful value exchange, and obviously Web3 kind of changes that. Have your thoughts on Web3 changed since you joined and now? Like, has there been anything kind of significant that your mental models have changed, or you look at things differently?
I'll say yes and no. I think that the core things that I believed about how Web3 is going to affect gaming are still true today. Obviously, the phrasing is different. When we first came out, a Web3 game was a P2E game. Like, even if earning was not the model, that was the terminology that people use. That's how you defined gaming in blockchain. So, obviously, watching the kind of the narrative and making sure that you're not just like following a trend, but kind of, setting the expectations for your specific project and what your vision is. I think that's important. But I'm really excited for, so like when I mentioned earlier, like when I joined Web3, I bought into the whole thing, like PFPs, community building, the art aspect, so like I own a lot of NFTs. I'm in a number of DAOs. I still like all of those, but it's really interesting because like gaming, it's something I know is going to succeed, because digital assets were already in gaming. They already had value. Gamers were paying $100 for something that only existed in a game. It's just that value, the monetary value, went to the publisher, the developer. But digital art, digital PFPs didn't really have value before NFTs. DAOs didn't really exist in that way before. So it'll be interesting to see how these things evolve. But for Web3 gaming specifically, I think it's just a no-brainer. It's just, we're doing the same thing we were doing before. We're making digital assets. We're just giving that value to gamers. We're just giving them the transparency of blockchain. We're giving them that provable scarcity. So it's really like, it's almost totally different than the broader Web3 discussion. When you talk to people about, the future of NFTs and the future of DAOs and just Web3 as a concept, which I still like and I'm a fan of, but it's almost a separate discussion from gaming, because to me, gaming is just no brainer. It's just hard to argue against it.
No, I agree. And this is questions meant to build on top of that, which is like, why should gamers care about Web3 gaming? And then how do you see Web3 gaming in 5 years from now? We kind of touched on it a little bit, but would love to kind of hear your thoughts again.
Yeah. So, and I've kind of suggested a few times, like this is a way to do Web3 poorly or badly. To me personally, like I believe in NFTs giving value to your players. Like I believe, because it's really all about the monetization model, right? So like if you look at like free to play, the monetization model is I now have to sell gamers these assets.
Right.
But if we're giving the assets to gamers, either free or extremely low cost, just to have a barrier to entry,
Right.
then and we're making our money on the secondary. So we're incentivized to add long-term value to the assets that gamers have. So now we have aligned incentives with our players. Instead of trying to devalue the assets that they've previously purchased, we're now trying to add value, add more, desire to get those items so that somebody else will come and buy them from that player, and we'll, receive a portion of that.
Right.
Players are going to see a large portion of that because, if you bought an item for $1 and you sell it for $100 and the fee is, 5%. I mean, your profits up, $90 or so, whereas the game company is making like $5. So it's a lot of the value is going to the gamers, to the players. And I think that that's important. Some games see it as like, we need to sell all of our NFTs, which, primary sales, like one of the fundamental problems is it puts you in competition with your customer. If the customer can now buy an asset and then go resell it, and you're still selling it, you're now in competition. So you've got to work that mechanic out and make it to where you're not incentivized to, devalue their assets or punish them in some way.
Right.
So I'm a big proponent of that. But I also, when we talk like that, and a lot of people say every, like Gabe says, every NFT should be free and things like that. And I agree. But I will say I am a big fan of primary sales for startups and like crowdfunding model, because I'm a fan of Kickstarter. I funded a number of games on Kickstarter that some never came out, some took many years. Star Citizen is one that I bought into. I don't know, it feels like 30 years ago now. I'm not even interested in that game anymore, but I have some ships over there. Ashes of Creation, an MMORPG that was on Kickstarter. I bought an Oculus Rift on Kickstarter, and I'm a big fan of crowdfunding as a model, because it kind of like I love VCs. VCs give so much value, but if VCs decided every project that gets funded, it would limit the imagination, the creativity that founders could have. When you can go straight to a community and say, this is my idea, what do you think? Or, if you share your passion with a group and they all want to buy in, I think that there's a lot of value in that. But obviously in Web3, the downside is the speculation. People buy your NFT, not because they agree with your vision or see your passion, but because they think they can flip it for a higher value. So that's something we definitely have to think about and talk about. But that's kind of my thoughts on the model. But I still am a fan of fundraising through NFTs. But in 5 years, I think I would love to see some of the Web3 projects that we're talking about today. Illuvium, Digi, and a lot of the ones that we're not talking about because they're small and very ambitious startups, but they have good teams. And they have a solid foundation. I'd like to see some of those have playable games that are really fun, and they're attracting Web2 players, because I don't think that Web2 players are going to initially come over because of tokenomics. Even if you tell them that the value is going to them and you explain the whole concept, I don't think that's what's going to bring them over initially. That's not what's going to change their mind. What's going to change their mind is they see a really fun game. Either, they watch a cinematic and it's just an epic story. They want to get involved in that world, or they see gameplay that is really fun and they want to try it out. And it's a free game that they can easily go download. They don't have to download a wallet. They don't have to do 10 steps. They go play the game and try it and they love it. And then they start falling in love with everything about it. And part of the everything about it is going to be Web3 and the NFTs that they either earn or collect or buy or create. And that's what's going to really be the big onboarding. And I'm excited for that over the next 5 years to see that kind of play out. And we start to see the narrative shift and gamers start to really understand the value of Web3.
Right. So you're kind of talking about Web3 as more so a feature than like a foundation to build on top of, which is, I think, great because people currently, when we build it as a foundation, it usually ends up being a lot more financialized than maybe people want. There's a question actually in chat that I would love to hear your comments on, which is most Web3 games have an open marketplace, which can be influenced by macroeconomics, inflation, interest rate, etc., which kind of makes the gamer's asset slash portfolio value volatile due to external factors. Do you see this being a problem in the future for Web3 gamers?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question because I give a lot of thought to that. As a crypto investor, you get kind of frustrated. You're buying Bitcoin. That's the whole narrative is it's fixed supply. It's kind of inflation proof. But then you see these inflation numbers and the stock market goes down, Bitcoin goes down, and it's like it all is connected because you've got investors and really it's like it's algos and high frequency traders that have all of these investments, and they are making these investment decisions in milliseconds, and so it all just moves together.
Right.
And we've seen that with Web3 in a lot of ways. NFT values fluctuate like that. You see the whole your specific project that you're passionate about. They're doing so many great things, but then their NFT value moves with every other NFT, and that's frustrating.
Right.
And so, will that affect games? I think it probably will. I think it's unfortunate that we will still have that kind of narrative. I think what's important is to not have the monetary value be as important. If gamers are playing your game and either they're using a token or not, I think it's important to have them not worry about the financial aspect. To know that they have value, but not what the value is. Obviously it's transparent; they can go see that, but to not make that the primary factor, and that's one thing. And it's just a different way to do it. But some games are going to have a token, and some games are going to have fiat. Where you pay with either USD or some USD digital currency. It's still going to be similar because NFT values will probably fluctuate. And why is that? You'll see investors that are buying these assets.
Right.
There are ways you can discourage that. You can kind of separate yourself. I do think that once we have, like when you go back to like Axie and you saw the Axie market blow up, part of the reason that Axie had such problems is because it was the one game that everyone was looking at. It was the one game that earners were looking at. If you wanted to make money in gaming, you could play Axie.
Right.
And there were others, but they didn't get the attention. If you were an investor and you believed in Web3 gaming or you believed in NFTs in gaming as disruption for the future, there was really only one investment, and that was Axie. So you had all this focus on investing time, money, resources into one economy. But in 5 years or 10 years, we're going to have hundreds, maybe thousands of Web3 games. And I don't think that we're going to see, as big of shifts in these gaming. I don't think speculators are going to be able to really influence all of these game economies the same. Maybe some of the largest ones, some of the economies that get the most focus. And if you look back, game economies often get financial media attention. You had, of course, trying to think of the name of the big exchange that blew up from Bitcoin, but that Mt. Gox, yes. So that started as trading for game assets. But you had Second Life with their currency. It got tons of attention every time there was some big investment or change in value. But that's something that's kind of that's not historic. So it'll be interesting once some of the larger Web3 games start to get kind of like media attention, and you turn on CNBC and you see like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and then Illuvium. You see the Illuvium assets. So it'll be interesting if they become like financialized, and you've got investors buying up assets and just holding them. You're seeing that with NFTs. A lot of investors have purchased some large NFTs and they're holding them as investments, kind of
Right.
a bet on the future of the space.
Mm,
But I do think that once the space gets bigger and appreciates and brings more players in, you won't have that problem to the extent that we had it before. But I do worry that it might always be something that affects the space.
yeah. No, I definitely agree. I actually had never thought about that almost diversification of games, and therefore like the decrease of speculators. From my side, I've actually seen a lot more game developers talk about including some sort of stable coin within their ecosystem to minimize that, and then also for implementing a automatic market maker so that the in-game currency is kind of pegged to one price, and the outside kind of currency can be as volatile as it kind of wants. I think that it's going to be interesting to see how people continue to reiterate and experiment with that. And obviously, like right now is the best time to do it because, like, if you're doing that during a bull market, then that might be difficult. But right now is a time to kind of build those stepping stones into something much bigger than what we had in the past. I wanted to ask, like, as a game developer, someone building a game, you've been doing it now for like a year or so. Like, what tips, advice, like comments can you give someone who's either building in the space or looking to build a game in the space, and looking forward?
Yeah, I think it's important, like considering the last question, to really kind of keep your eyes on the space. Be involved and engaged in conversations. Watching interviews like this, getting on spaces and talking to other builders, because people have different ideas, and some of those ideas are going to resonate with you, and you're going to see them tested and proved. Talking about the tokenomic models. There's a lot of I'm reading papers, some done by friends of mine who are putting together amazing ideas, but
Mm,
these ideas need to be tested. They need to be iterated. We need to see them, see if they work or not, and how they can scale up or down. So I think it's important to do that, to just be open,
mm,
and not be just totally closed off as you're building. But at the same time, you also want to keep your vision as your focus.
mm,
If you have a core belief, if you have a core vision for your product, you don't want to pivot too often.
mm,
You want to make changes when they're necessary, when they're going to add value to your project, to what you're building. But you don't want to change with the wind. Every time there's a new shift, staking is the thing. So now we're adding staking. If there's some random mechanic that comes out, you don't want to just like chase that, because that's never ending, and you're not going to get long-term value from it.
yeah.
And you're making promises and commitments that you either can't stick to, or they're going to be very painful to stick to. So I think
Mm,
really like keeping a core focus, but also listening to the other builders, watching the space evolve, and knowing when you need to pivot would be most important.
definitely. Yeah, I think pivoting is tough, right? Especially during a bear market. And this is something else I wanted to ask, which is we are in a bear market and sentiment is, somewhat low, much lower than what it was during the bull. Like, do you foresee any sort of change in momentum in that in the future? And if so, why? And if not, then what is going to be the thing that is going to change that momentum?
Yeah, so when we talk about the bear market, certainly true. It's harder to fundraise today, either from crowdsourced fundraising, crowdfunding, or from VCs,
Right.
because the interest rates and
Mm,
stocks and just everything. But gamers are as active as ever, and
mm,
so I really think that if you're building, and as long as you have the runway, a bear market is just as fine as a bull market.
mm,
The main difference is it's harder to get that early capital. But
right.
onboarding gamers, I don't think that they're going to care that it's a bear market. I think that if they can play a fun game, that's what they're going to do, and they're going to try your game. And I think that I mean, there's lots of stats that show that gaming is kind of recession proof. So I'm not really
Right.
worried about that. But I do think that it definitely changes how easy it is for startups to get funding, and so you have to be more creative. You also have to be very dedicated. It's something that you have to be very passionate about to succeed.
Yeah.
And if you can come up with either a passion project that you can prove to a community, that you can prove to investors to fund and build, or if you can come up with something very creative that does something differently, then that's that's going to help a lot too. But I do think that I mean, I watch all the macroeconomic conditions, and I do think things are going to get better. And some of this we kind of needed. We needed a lot of that speculation was unhealthy. A lot of projects got funded that it seems obvious that they were never going anywhere. But there was easy money. There were a lot of speculation about the space growing, and I think a lot of people just like the early internet. The early internet in the '90s, it was easy to convince investors that this is the future. But if you get in too early or you're too excited and you're investing in every startup, then you're buying a lot of things that are not going to work because it's an idea. It's an unproven team. It's someone that doesn't have the experience, the execution to be able to actually build the products, and maybe they're over ambitious about the time that it's going to take to acquire customers and become profitable. So I think we're going to see a lot of that in Web3, and that's healthy for the space. We don't need all these, I mean, I don't want to call any projects like junk projects, but, we don't need a lot of projects that don't have the tools necessary to succeed, to be funded and out there, like trying to onboard players with things that may not be good for the space, that may not be good for players, and just kind of like, confuse things. So it's going to be better to have projects that either resonate with communities so they can fundraise that way, or projects that can really prove to investors that they're solid investments. So I think those two things are going to be really important.
Right. I think you already touched on this, which is like there's a lot of obstacles still that Web3 gaming has to go overcome in order to really succeed, from storytelling to onboarding. Like, which obstacle do you foresee is like the toughest, I guess, to overcome, and what is something that you think is we're starting to really look at in terms of like overcoming it as an industry?
Yeah, there's a lot. I think that the biggest thing is just the narrative, and really, I think we over focus on onboarding and like the problems of that. Really, there are not great games to play today. I mean, there are Web3 games, but most of them are like really early. They're alphas. We're launching an alpha, and yeah, we're going to be showing this to gamers, but we're not doing mass onboarding until we have more playable modes that appeal to gamers that they can really sink their time into. And I think a lot of games are in that position. And so, it's important not to just overly focus on, oh, we haven't onboarded 1 million players. What's wrong? Well, I mean, what's wrong is you don't have a game that 1 million people are going to play, and so that's what you need to build. And that takes time. But I do think that we could all do better with storytelling. That's something that we at our project are looking at a lot. We have some lore out there, but we focus so much on development that we're not telling the story as well as we could, and really bringing players into the world and getting them really excited about what we're building, because you can do that well. I mean, you see that, like I mentioned, Kickstarter. Some of the projects I bought into did a really great job of telling the story and sharing the vision for the game. And some projects do that really well, and in other projects, that's something that they could do better on. So I think that as a space, telling the story of our games, and getting people excited about the world, and not as much focus on the investment side, is really important.
In terms of like Web3 gaming as a market, what is one thing that you're bearish about, and what is one thing that you're like super bullish about?
Yeah, so I am super bullish on games that they're fun first, but they don't throw out the value out of Web3. Like, I think that it's important not to just write the whole thing off and say, okay, we're a Web3 game, but you can't trade NFTs because that's speculation. We're not going to have a token because we don't want to have speculators and the market dynamics. I think that part of the value of Web3 is giving players unprecedented like control and transparency of assets, and like enhanced ownership. And you really don't have ownership when you're sticking all these restrictions on everything, we talk about like soulbound NFTs, which may have their place, but you don't want everything in your game to be frozen,
Right.
because then it's what was the point of putting it on blockchain? What was the point of
Mm.
tokens? So I think that I'm bullish on companies that find that balance.
Mm.
Now bearish, I think there's a lot of things. I think obviously earning as a model is something that has to be really, you don't want to accidentally create that model and not be aware of it.
Right.
When you talk about like play to earn, it's not new to Web3.
Mm.
You can open up the App Store and you can find tons of games where you can earn money by playing,
Right.
puzzle games or things like that. But it's ad supported. It's not interesting. People play it and there's some competition and you are earning some money, but it's like pennies. It's not really worth it. But if your selling point of your game is you can come in and like make a living doing it, I think we have to be really careful about that. And also NFTs as investments. Like I think that like I'm someone who will invest in NFTs, but
Mm.
if you're bringing in mostly investors and not players, or the
Mm.
investors are somehow um, hurting the player experience, I think
Right.
that's something really important to think about too.
Yeah.
So balancing that out, some games like Web2 games have whales, and that's a big part of their game, and it doesn't take away from the player experience. But
Mm.
other games, they do that poorly, and so it's important to kind of look at Web2 games, like what
Right.
worked and what didn't.
Mm.
How does the monetization break the player experience?
Mm.
And is our economy or our tokenomics or our NFTs like going to do that? And or could that happen? And how could we mitigate that?
Mm.
So I think that's important to really consider too. Like, and that that's a point like to make, not to reinvent the wheel when you don't have to. Like if something is a model that a gameplay loop or an economic model that worked or failed in Web 2,
Right.
learn for that for Web 3. Don't just like start from scratch and try to reinvent everything yourself.
Right.
But yeah, I think that would be my bullish and bearish.
Okay, cool. That makes sense. I think, I really like what you said at the end, which is like we should look back at what we've learned in the past to influence how we build in the future. I don't think that we do that too much because when we hear Web 2, everybody's like, that sucks. Like, we're just not even going to like think about it. It's like this, like you're either Web 2 or Web 3. And at the end of the day, I think we all know it should just be, either it should just be the internet or it should just be gaming. It shouldn't be kind of like Web 3 gaming. I think that there is a focus on that this year, pushing towards that a little bit. What would you say for you is like the thing that excites you the most for 2023 within Web3 gaming?
Um, I don't know. I think what we're building, I'm really excited for. I'm extremely biased, I know, but I'm excited for like really all the games. Like I'm in a lot of space. I meet a lot of founders,
Yeah.
people that are super passionate about the projects that they're building. I'm excited for some of these games to come out and to try them out, and to see which ones have the potential to really onboard and keep players. And you look at like Web 2 games, and some games have, a lot of games have this cycle of they release, they get this big surge in player base, and then it declines over time and they kind of fade away. Few games have like a lasting player base, so it's important to like really look for that. And I'm excited for some of these games that are planning for like a really sticky game to where
Mm.
it's going to bring in players, but it's going to keep them, or they've
Mm.
got a growth plan that's going to continuously build up the player base.
Right.
That's going to be really interesting. So I hope to see some of those games either, if not fully developed, at least releasing some playable versions in 2023.
Definitely. Again, like kind of being able to be with re-NFT, we're starting to see that like just a sliver of people launching, which is exciting because, and I think that there is this problem where if games don't launch and people don't play the games, then we don't know what problems people have to improve those games and then to reiterate and ultimately become better as an industry. And I think we're starting to see that. And that's exciting because then we actually are getting some progress, like, that cold start problem. But I really want to thank you for coming on. I think there has to be more kind of communication on how people are building within the space. What are people thinking about? What are people doing to ultimately better their own game and kind of better the industry? And having people like yourself be able to speak on it and become almost like an authoritative figure on like, hey, let's push forward and let's see what they're thinking about and like let's try it ourselves and let's try something new. Is super important for us to like actually move forward in the space, and it feels like we're really doing that. And so I really appreciate you coming on today.
My pleasure. I appreciate you having me.
Of course. And I hope for everybody that was watching that you've been able to get a deeper understanding into the world of blockchain gaming and the potential for its future. I think Chris really outlined really why gaming is a really great first use case, but it definitely won't be the ultimate use case for Web3. There's still so much more that it can affect in our kind of everyday lives, really. And gaming developers, I hope that we inspired you through this show. We hope that you enjoyed learning more about the stories and challenges of Uldor. I'm sure that there's many more that we didn't discuss, and there's going to be many more successes that we'll foresee in the future. And we're going to keep on bringing interesting guests that are disrupting the Web3 gaming space. So don't forget to follow our channels and stay tuned for the next episode. And if you're a game developer looking to diversify your game economy, we have a solution for you. Reach out to renft.io and let's talk about NFT rentals. Thank you so much, Chris. I really appreciate it. I had a lot of fun. Again, like it was cool to just kind of catch up with you. Again, I've known you, I think, now for about a year. I think when you started Uldor, and you've progressed so much, and I can't wait to see the playable kind of game come out and see how that looks like, and ultimately also see where the funding takes you. And any way that I can help, please reach out. We're here to help.
Thanks again.
All right. Have a good one, everybody. Peace.